Good evening, and welcome to the first session of the Jhana Practice Group, January 2008. I am Tina Rasmussen.
And I'm Stephen Snyder.
And we're really excited to be here with all of you, and we're just so amazed at the turnout. This is many more people than we were expecting. So
we expected about 4. So to have about 15 or 16 people is tremendous.
Yes, so welcome. We thought we'd start with a little bit of background about each of us and who we are and something about our practice. So for me, I work professionally as an organizational development consultant and coach. I've been doing this work for about 25 years and have had a couple of books published on the subject. We are a married couple, in case anybody didn't know that. Just if you see us holding hands or something, we thought that would be important to know.
Right.
And from a practice standpoint, I've been meditating. I was very fortunate that I learned to meditate at the age of 13, so it's been 31 years now. That gives you a hint about my age. And I have been meditating daily for about, it's been about 15 years. And have been doing Buddhist retreats for over 10 years now. And a few years ago, I did a year-long solo retreat where I was meditating 8 to 12 hours a day, doing other spiritual practice every single day for over a year, and it was quite a powerful experience. So I would highly recommend solo retreats to anybody who feels drawn in that direction.
Yes, and I presently work. I do some professional coaching. I also work as an attorney, as I have for a little over 20 years. By way of meditative practice, I first began doing Buddhist practice, Buddhist meditation, when I was about 19, and I've done so for a little over 30 years. And I've done, within the Buddhist realm, I've done Zen practice for about 20 years. I've also done some of the Dzogchen Rigpa practice, and of course the jhana practice with the Venerable Paul Sayadaw.
And we should probably say, just in case people don't know, that we both did the 2-month retreat with Venerable Paul Sayadaw in 2005 in Middletown. That was where we studied under him, and were, as a result of that, after a fairly long amount of time, over a year passed, were really compelled by others who were interested in this practice and really wanted to learn more about what had happened for us on that retreat, and some of the suggestions we had to offer. That was how the book came about. And after the book was written, which is called Jhana's Advice from Two Spiritual Friends, others got more interested in us offering teachings like this group, and that's when we decided to do the group.
Right.
So we did want to talk a little bit about why we're doing this and our intention. So first, we really wanted to do this as an offering to the Buddhist community in gratitude for all that we have gained and appreciated, and the significant impact on our life of Buddhist practice and of this particular practice. So we really, first and foremost, wanted to offer this as a contribution in some way to the Buddhist community and to those who feel drawn to the jhana practice.
We also were very interested in helping those who are planning to attend the retreat in 2008 with the Venerable Paul Sayadaw at Forest Refuge, the 4-month retreat planned, and I know several of you were signed up to attend that. We really want to help discuss the jhana practice, answer questions around the meditative practice and the various progress of this practice, so that people could be a little more prepared for the retreat.
And the Sayadaw, really, he has wanted to have a bridge to the West, and is very encouraging of this and what we're doing, and anybody who wants to have preparation before the retreat, he's very much in favor of that. So just to communicate that as well.
Yeah, additionally, as Tina mentioned, we have written a book, The Jhana's Advice and Two Spiritual Friends. So part of the benefit to us from this group is really in the explaining of the jhana practice, hearing your questions, your comments, your experiences, so it helps us refine and see what really applies in a broader context than just the context of two people. So it's very helpful for us.
And then lastly, just offering the Dharma to others is a whole level of practice that requires additional aspects to it, or has additional aspects to it beyond being a practitioner. And so we're doing this in part for our own growth as practitioners. And so we're very grateful that you all are here to allow us to have this next stage in our own practice. So thank you.
And really supporting us in doing that. Before we begin, one clarifying point I want to make is we are not Buddhist scholars or historians. We are going to present the information that we learned to the best of our ability, as well as what we experienced. We will be making references occasionally to various aspects of Buddhism and or Buddhist history. And again, we're not intending to be scholars or historians, and so if there are scholars or historians present or listening who know that we have stated something incorrectly, we apologize for that. We've done our best to be accurate. But again, we're trying to stay focused on our experience rather than on giving scholarly lectures.
In giving a little overview of our topics for the evening, we'd like to have this talk be a general overview of the jhana practice. We'll talk about where the practice came from, what are the jhanas, why you would want to do this practice, and then we'll give you an overview using this chart, which we hope will be available on the internet. So anybody who's listening via tape, you can get that and have it with you as well. And we'll give you an overview of the entire path of practice, the Samatha path of practice as taught by Pa Sayadaw. So in the Theravada system of practice, there are really 3 stages. And to give you a sense of where what we're teaching fits in that, the first stage of the practice is sila, and that is morality. And really all of the Buddhist teachings and all of the traditions rely on this as the foundation of ethical behavior that doesn't harm the world or oneself or others. And that is also true with this practice, that a base of ethical behavior is really required. And that's part of what the hindrances do, is purify the places where there needs purification. But coming into the practice with a commitment to sila and without having regrets or remorse that are weighing on one, coming into the practice is also very practical, because it allows the awareness to be free to focus on the present moment rather than being caught up in a lot of regret or desire about the future. So sila is then the first stage of the practice. The second is samatha, of which the jhanas is one component of the samatha practice. And samatha means tranquility or serenity. And but I do think there's a whole lot more to samatha than just tranquility. It really is designed to purify the mind. And if you look at the Visuddhimagga, that's really what is talked about in the samatha practice, that it's a purification of consciousness. And there are a number of different objects of concentration that are used in this to purify the mind in different ways. And that's really where the jhanas fit, is within samatha. The third stage then is vipassana, which translates as insight. And a lot of what we have learned in the West is the vipassana practice as taught by, primarily in the tradition of Mahasi Sayadaw, as well as some of the Thai forest monks and teachers. The insight practice is really designed to culminate in insights about mentality, the mind stream, and materiality, the world as we know it around us. And those are the three practice stages of the Theravadan path.
The Buddha first came to jhana practice, we learn from the history books, after leaving his life as a prince of the day. And there were teachers at that time. He had a teacher who taught him the first through seventh jhana, and there were specialist, in effect, teachers of the day who taught the eighth jhana. So the Buddhas learned the first through eighth jhana, and later what he added is the Vipassana portion of the practice. The jhana practice was a practice that was done prior to the Buddha. There are some changes that he probably made to that, and then added the Vipassana portion to become the entirety of the Buddhist path. It's important to know that this jhana practice, was significant enough to the Buddha that the Buddha not only mentioned jhana practice virtually whenever he referenced right concentration in many, many suttas. In addition, in the last sutta, the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, which is the sutta recording the Buddha's death, the Buddha is reported to have practiced the jhana practice right before death, in that he went through the jhanas 1 through 8, back down from 8 to 1, and then went to the first, second, third, fourth jhana, came out of the fourth jhana and died. And so it's noteworthy to us, when the Buddha had a teaching career that lasted in excess of 40 years, taught many kinds of meditation, many practices, that he would return to this jhana practice as the very final practice of his life is, again, quite impressive to us, and really impresses upon us that there's a great deal of significance in this practice, the purification aspect and the tranquility aspect, which we'll be talking about later this evening and throughout this 6 months. The jhana practice, as we're going to present it, as we learned it from the Venerable Pollock Sayadaw, begins with anapanasati practice. And what we mean by anapanasati practice is we mean that the meditator brings their awareness to what we are calling the anapana spot, which is a spot that's between the nostrils and the upper lip. And it's a very specific spot there where the meditator knows the breath as it passes this spot, and knows the movement of breath across this spot. So it's a beginning of placing the awareness, placing the attention on this anapana spot, and having the knowing of the breath passing the spot, both inhalation and exhalation. Now, of course, with all of us, when we begin this practice, the attention will slip off of the spot. We'll find either the mind will wander, or the attention just is not on this object. And so the practice here is the returning of that attention back again and again, back to the anapana spot, without criticism, self-judgment, without guilt or blame. And it's also a continuity of practice, which takes place both on the meditation cushion or seat as well as off. That the attention is placed on the anapana spot before, during, and after every event that you participate in throughout your day. So
the anapana spot isn't the skin. So just to be clear, we're not feeling the skin underneath between the lip and the nostril. As Stephen said, it's the knowing. That is really the object, is the knowing, the awareness of the breath as it moves across the spot. So just to be clear, there's a lot of subtleties when you get into this that really make the difference as you're spending many hours doing it. We'd also like to talk about what the practice is not. And first, I think it's really important that we put aside what we know of really all other meditation practices, including other jhana practices. There are a number of methods of practicing the jhanas out there, and we don't make any claim to have expertise in any other method. So really what we're offering is our understanding of the Buddhist teachings as taught by Paul Sayadaw.
And our experience of those.
But what we did see was on the retreat we were on, there were a number of people who had practiced with other teachers, and of course almost everyone in the West who would be drawn to this has probably done a mindfulness retreat, or I'll say many or most, a mindfulness style retreat in the lineage of Mahasi Sayadaw at Spirit Rock or IMS. And we saw a lot of confusion based on people's existing understanding, especially around mindfulness. So, for example, in the West, if we've done the Mahasi style practice, the word mindfulness would mean to be aware of the focus of attention in the moment. So that might be the breath, and then as one gets up and starts moving and goes to walking meditation, the object might be the movements, the lifting, the moving, the placing, the moving of the fork into your mouth as you're doing an eating meditation. That is mindfulness. That's being mindful. And when you hear the Venerable Paul Sayadaw talking or read his book or read, we've tried to distinguish a little more carefully using that word, but the word mindful just means to be mindful of your object, which is knowing the breath at the Anapana spot. So anytime you hear the word be mindful, you will never ever take your awareness off of the object of the knowing of the breath at the Anapana spot. So, this is a place where we could see people asking questions or going out and doing the slow mindful walking and completely losing their concentration because they were bringing what they knew from a different practice to this practice. And so we really want to encourage you to, not that those practices aren't useful, they absolutely are, but it won't necessarily help you when you're doing this. Another example would be doing mindfulness of breathing. In the Mahasi instructions, there's encouragement to be mindful of the breathing at the belly, or to be mindful of the breathing at whatever spot is predominant. Maybe that would be at the nostril or the upper lip, maybe it would not be there. And in this practice, it's really essential that the awareness of the breathing be done in the area of the Anapana spot for reasons that will become clearer later. So we can pretty much guarantee that if you don't use that spot as the focus of the mindfulness of breathing, the Anapanasati, that the jhanas will never arise using this method. So just a word of encouragement to really take this practice fresh.
We'd like to talk a little bit about why do the jhana practice. Now, the benefits initially of the jhana practice are purification of mind. And there's two aspects to purification of mind. One is the tranquility, the settling, the silence, the stillness that is perceived and that permeates the body and the mind of the meditator. And the other aspect that's less discussed is actually knowing that there's going to be an engagement of the hindrances and or defilements to the extent necessary to maintain the knowing, maintaining the awareness of the object, the Anapana spot. So again, we're not going after to find hindrances and defilements. This isn't family therapy to uproot those kinds of issues. We're working with them enough to stay on the object, and there is a purification that happens by engaging and knowing that we're going to be engaging the hindrances and the defilements. And again, also, that in itself allows a purification, and is a purification of the stillness and the purity of the actual meditative experience when one is concentrated. Now, with concentration, part of the reason that this is the Buddha emphasized this as a very important part of the Buddhist path, is that not only is there the purification of the mind that happens with this practice, and there is a lessening of the defilements and an increasing of the jhana factors, which are that unification piece, which really is concentration, is also this will become applied later in the Buddhist path. There's other practices, the Vipassana practices, for example, where this level of concentration, of unification, of cohesion can be applied in a way that's really specific, and it's really very energized, very bright, and one is able to penetrate a lot of the practices in a way that's very, very beneficial.
A couple of other benefits of doing this practice. Another one is that I think really has been, these two I think have been discussed much less and in a way maybe undervalued historically in the West as to what the jhana practice offers. And the first is that, especially as the practice evolves to the jhanas, the formless jhanas, or the formless realms as they're often called, these are the direct experience of the formless realms is so purifying and so directly experiential that afterwards the meditator carries with him or herself permanently a sense of how awareness as well as materiality manifests from the unconditioned through the realms, the increasingly dense realms, formless realms, and then form realms, down to this which I take relatively as me, and even the energy of these words as they're coming out to you and hitting your ear. There's a direct visceral knowing of that process. It's not an intellectual knowing that I can now scientifically say how it works, but I can feel it because it's happening to every single one of us right this second. We are manifestations of the unconditioned realm.
It's also a knowing that's outside of concept is very important.
Right.
That's what you're speaking of.
Yeah, it is. It's, we could probably look at quantum physics maybe and somehow have it explained. I don't know enough. We couldn't, yeah.
One could.
But to feel that as not only an experience while the jhanas are happening, but in everyday life, to carry that into every experience as a direct experiential knowing is really indescribably impactful on how everyday life is lived and on the understanding of not only the relative but the mystery. And to have that mystery be a direct experience that doesn't have to, there is no need to rely on someone else telling you, because it's now an experience that is direct and immediate.
And there's also a way that really this kind of experience really begins to inform the awareness of the meditator in a way that the meditator really can work with other areas of practice with a kind of sophistication, I think.
And of life.
And of life, right.
Yeah,
Excellent point.
So that's one that we really want to add to the conversation about jhanas. And then the other, to go back to that, there's a reason why the jhanas practice has been done throughout the eons of spiritual practitioners. It's not a coincidence that this has been the practice people did to really understand the mystery, maybe not, as Stephen said, intellectually, but experientially. And then the second, which also hasn't been talked about much, is that as the progression happens through the jhanas, there's an absolute requirement of the thinning of the sense of me, of attachment to the me, because there's and you'll see this when we go through the path of practice, there's the objects get more and more and more and more refined as the path unfolds. There's less and less possibility of the sense of me doing anything to be present. And so there's a very significant dropping to the point where it's almost non-existent of the sense of me.
There's really a kind of there's an appropriateness of what I would call surrender. There's a timing and an appropriateness and a way of doing it with, of course, working with the teacher helps refine and define when that is. But that's really I think another piece of what you're talking about, that with that de-emphasis on the me.
Right. And we'll talk about this in depth later, but at the beginning there is a sense of needing to put in wise effort, and then as the practice unfolds, there's a sense of the practice doing you.
Right.
And it becomes very clear that there really isn't a me doing it, and that it is being done. So it's a little, esoteric, but I think it's a direct experience of being without the me.
We also want to talk about what isn't a good reason to do a jhana practice. We have heard from people who really look at this practice as a method and a way of pursuing bliss states. They really want to escape from life, and they really want to have these bliss states just be present whenever they want. And this really isn't the point of this practice. This practice, as we've said, is really about that thinning of the me, the non-attachment. It is a moving through your own hindrances and defilements with a purifying mind, and by moving through, greater purification happens. So this is really done to purify the mind in preparation for the other portion of the practice, which is the Vipassana practice, which Tina will elaborate on in a moment.
Yeah, so really doing it for that reason, I think first of all, I think it would be unlikely that it would progress very far, because there's a lot of...
It's a selfish practice.
Yeah,
really.
Well, there's a lot of attachments that can arise that block any progress. And secondly, it seems like a real diminishment of the deeper purpose to be sort of substituting it for a good drug trip, or a lot of us were around in the 60s and 70s, and this is maybe a healthier alternative, but it's really not the point of doing it.
Right. This practice really becomes a refinement where there's an intention to start the practice, but there is a point where the practice, as Tina said, really begins doing you, and that's really where this practice engages. The other aspect of this practice that's not good to pursue is really the chasing of attainment. We have had conversations with people who really look at this, that they want to really get the meditative notches or merit badges by having these attainments. And this again is a practice that if you're trying to do it, if you're trying to pursue it for a benefit that is less than the highest purpose that this offers, it's probably not going to unfold and be present for you. It's something that's going to stay away, because in effect you're not coming with it with the sila, with the wholesomeness that's necessary, a kind of respect and a kind of humility that also is a part of this practice when you're beginning and progressing through the practice.
Yeah, there's a way that chasing attainments actually can cause a lot of suffering, a lot, with the striving, with the grasping, beating oneself up if there isn't progress and so on. That's probably one of the biggest deterrents to this practice is the striving.
Right.
We'd like to now then go over the chart which we have hanging here on the wall, and for those listening remotely, it should be available for download. And this is the path of practice as taught by Venerable Pauk Sayadaw, and he has seen this chart, and we've incorporated his minor modifications in it, so it's fully approved. And really, you can see, I talked earlier about the Sila, the Samatha, and the Vipassana. And the Sila is not on here, but you can see the majority of what we are teaching and what is in our book is in the Samatha. And then Venerable Pauk Sayadaw does teach a full Vipassana path, which is different than what we have learned in the Mahasi method. So we aren't really going to get into that much, but just so that you do know that his path is complete. He doesn't really consider himself to be a jhanas teacher. He considers himself to be a Buddhist teacher who teaches the entire path of the Buddha. You can see then from the chart, it says in the bold box at the lower left, start here in most cases. So occasionally he pretty much starts everyone with the Anapanasati practice. But occasionally if somebody has worked diligently and hasn't made progress doing that, he will then have them start with the 4 elements. So you can see it says, or here in fewer cases. So we won't be talking too much about 4 elements. I'm going to start instead with the Anapana practice. And I'm not going to go through everything on here in detail, but really focus on the big buckets of practice. The first segment then, from the form jhanas up until where the immaterial jhanas start, that encompasses the first 4 jhanas. So in that practice, the meditator starts on their first sitting on the cushion doing the Anapana practice, and gradually the jhana factors arise, the absorption into the first jhana happens, the meditator works through the first 4 jhanas using Anapanasati, the mindfulness of breathing, as the primary object, and then other objects are taken as a bridge to then go to what are called the kasinas. And a kasina is a disc, a colored disc that has inside it either a color or one of the elements. So just to read to you what the kasinas are in this progression: white nila, which is kind of a blue, brown, purple color; yellow, red, earth, which is the first of the elements; water, fire, wind, light, and space. And so as the meditator then goes through the 4 jhanas using Anapanasati as the object, then each of these is taken as the primary object, and the progress through the 4 jhanas is done with that as an object. So by the time you've finished, you've had 10 kasinas as the object in addition to Anapana. So there's a lot of time spent doing the first 4 jhanas using different objects as your primary object. And the reason for this is that using different objects strengthens the concentration. Every time you change an object, you're starting not from scratch, but you are starting, and the concentration needs to develop to the point where it's stable and can be at sufficient strength to go through all 4 jhanas. So using all these different objects really, really increases the concentration. And Pauk Sayadaw does have time requirements for all of these, as well as each jhana and each object needs to be mastered using 5 jhana masteries, which we'll get into later. But one of those is a time duration. And so by the time one has completed all of these, there's an incredible amount of stillness, of one-pointedness, and of stability in the practice. At that point then, we move on to this next segment of the progression, which is the immaterial jhanas. And these are also called the formless jhanas, or the formless realms. And the reason for that is that they really are qualitatively different. You can see all of the objects in the form jhanas are material. They're materiality, and get more and more refined all the way up to space. And so in the immaterial jhanas, you have 4 jhanas, or 4 formless realms. First is the base of boundless space. That's the 5th jhana. The 6th jhana is the base of boundless consciousness. The 7th is the base of nothingness, or as we would say, no-thingness, because it's not really nothing, it's more no-thing. And then the 8th jhana is the base of neither perception nor non-perception. And these may not mean much to you, but you can see from the 8th jhana that we're really talking about, it's a non-dual awareness that is present in that jhana as the object.
Yeah, but if I can jump in, that non-dual aspect means that in the 8th jhana there is neither perception nor non-perception, so there is a way where it's sort of like there is neither and both at the same time, and that's really what Tina's alluding to as the non-dual. That's really what we mean by that term.
Right. By the time the awareness is moving into the 8th jhana, it is so fine that the mind isn't doing anything, because the mind can't hold something that is paradoxical. So in the immaterial jhanas, you also go through kasinas. They are in a different order, which is earth, water, fire, wind, nila, red, yellow, white, and light. And you don't use the space kasina because space is the first of the formless jhanas. It's the 5th jhana, yeah. And the formless jhanas really, the experience of doing that practice is so purifying, and this is really where I think the profundity that we were trying to communicate earlier about understanding how consciousness as well as materiality works its way down from the unconditioned into form. If you went from 8 back down to 1, you could see how it's denser and denser and denser and denser. And in doing this practice, that is what is experienced directly. And so with the hours and hours and hours spent doing all of these over periods of weeks or months, or even for some people years, continuously all day long, there's an incredible pristine awareness that develops that is really indescribable. Then once the formless jhanas have been completed, there are 2 more categories of objects within the samatha practice. The first is the 4 sublime abidings, or better known in the West as the Brahma-viharas, which are very much like what we've learned in the West. Loving kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity. And there's a very specific way of doing that again is very similar to what we've done in the West, and those are completed up to whatever appropriate level of jhana is available. And then the next step is to go on to the protective meditations, which are the recollection of the Buddha, foulness, which is really a corpse meditation, and recollection of death. And together, these 4 practices form the base of refuges, I would say, for the meditator in preparation for going into Vipassana, which can be very destabilizing and uprooting to one's normal sense of security and functioning in reality. And so the sublime abidings give one a sense of warm-heartedness. They also help purify one's relationships with others and with oneself. And they give a sense of compassion for whatever's arising, as well as equanimity, that we can trust that we live, that what is occurring is just, and there is an equanimity and a sense to it, even if we can't always understand that from a relative perspective. That's really what the sublime abidings do. And then the protective meditations, the recollection of the Buddha provides a wonderful inspiration for us. The foulness meditation reminds us not to be too attached, to think that we are the body.
There's also, I think, with that one, I think there's also a piece that can be learned about the immediacy and the fact that there isn't time to really waste it really is important to engage the practice in a wholehearted way.
Well, that's the recollection of death is
Right.
The foulness has that, and then the recollection of death is specifically targeted right at that I could die any time. Well, I don't want to waste time. There's a burning platform here that I need to be aroused to really take action immediately. So yes, all of the protective meditations, they all serve those various purposes in preparation for then going on to the 4 elements, which in Park Sayadaw's progression is the first practice that then takes one into Vipassana. And we won't be talking about that, but here then the meditator shifts to a momentary concentration practice and really adopts a whole new set of practices while continuing to maintain the 8 jhanas, 1 sitting a day, to keep the concentration strong. So that is an overview of the progression of practice as taught by Park Sayadaw and the Buddha.
Are there any questions on that? Or anything else we've talked about? All right, we'd like to settle in and do the Anapanasati meditation now. Seated in an upright posture on your cushion or chair, with your spine straight and your shoulder blades relaxed down your back towards the floor. Place your hands comfortably on your legs or in your lap. With eyes closed, allow your attention to be lightly placed on the Anapana spot. The Anapana spot is where the breath is known between the nostrils and the upper lip. With your attention at the Anapana spot, know the breath as it passes the Anapana spot with each inhalation and exhalation. When the attention wanders from the Anapana spot, gently return it without judgment or self-criticism.
Thank you so much for being here. We really are very grateful to be able to share this practice with you.
Thank you very much, and have a very safe trip home this evening.